Hi, friends, it's Heidi M, and I'm joined virtually today with multi talented artist Lola Rocknrolla. Welcome, Lola. So great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Heidi. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited to speak with you. You are an award winning filmmaker, you're a playwright, but you're also a musician. So, a lot of folks in the US perhaps might know you as somebody who toured around the US quite a bit. So, why don't we start with that bit about you and introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. Well, I got the moniker Lola Rocknrolla, which is my legal name now, which is super fun. I got that nickname just from playing saxophone and singing in bands and writing songs, and I was always in really, you know, dirty punk rock bands, that had like, $20 to our name, touring on the coast. And I don't know, you probably have never heard of some of my bands like Mega Babe or Get It Girl. My last band was called Sweet Tits. It was an all female band. Well, we had a male drummer, but the rest were all women. And we were kind of trying to do a like jokey take on just like when you're a woman in a band, there's like so much sexism in that sort of rock and roll space. And also, like anytime you'd Google the band, if you didn't go Sweet Tits Band and you just did Sweet Tits, then it's just horrible porn for like forever. And so we thought that was really funny too. But yeah, no, I've played in bands for forever. Yeah, touring up and down the West Coast and the East Coast, and I played saxophone in Dean's second band, the Velvet Mafia.
You did, and we'll get into Dean's story as well, which is what we're here to kind of highlight. But I kind of wanted to ask you the segue of being in music, but also becoming a filmmaker. How did that kind of was a trajectory for you, I guess?
Well, it was kind of an easy one because all of my bands were broke, and so we had to do music videos and stuff like that. And so I
Mm,
started doing videos for a lot of my bands, and then I realized that I was kind of better at that than music. Like I love playing music, especially just making so much noise with my friends, and
yes.
and I love it very much. But directing is really like where my main talent is. And when I did my first music video, I think it was for the band Get It Girl, actually. I started doing more music videos for all my friends' bands, and then I just kind of ballooned out into me doing a ton of music videos, and then my short film Dragzilla, which I made as soon as I moved to New York, which is about a 50-foot drag queen that crushes New York City. And Dean is in that movie getting crushed by a giant high heel. It's pretty funny.
Yes, that I am aware of, and that's awesome. And
Yeah.
that's also a great segue to talk about Dean Johnson. This is your first feature film. Congratulations. It's a documentary and an icon in the queer spaces. And it's at Slamdance Film Festival right now. But, maybe I know there's a connection. You were good friends with Dean, and you have some really great access, obviously, from lived experience, but to his diary and close friends. How did that even start for you? Where did you even begin?
Well, I mean, I lived in the East Village. I was on Ludlow between Houston and Stanton. I came a little late. I was there in the late 90s, which is late for this crowd because oh, it was better in the 80s, and then everybody in the
Right.
90s, like, it's better in the 90s, and whatever. But all of these people are people that I know, and they're friends of mine. And Dean was kind of like the gay big brother I always wanted. Like he really was sort of like a den mother to us. Like he really
Mhm.
took care of the queer culture. He really like looked after us, and he gave a lot of people like their first opportunities. Like certainly at like a club like CBGB's, they didn't have queer artists in there at all. And Dean not only brought queer artists in from New York, but from like around the world. And it was like so inclusive. It wasn't just like gay men, it was like trans women and lesbians, and anybody who was part of the alphabet soup was allowed in. And so his generosity in that way was like really profound for all of us. And so I got into making a documentary about Dean. I've been doing like kind of horror comedies for a while. I like
Yes,
to
yes.
exploitation, and I've made about 10 shorts, and I did an off-Broadway show that I wrote with Gina Volpe, who's the guitarist of Lunatics.
Hmm.
Um, and that did really well. We were off Broadway for a while. And I wasn't really planning on making a documentary, but then Dean and I were hanging out and we were talking about the next music video for the Velvet Mafia that I was going to direct. And he left to go on a job in DC and never came back. And so the loss of that is and the loss of him is what drove me to make a documentary in the first place. Like, I usually watch action movies or campy horror movies or John Waters movies, stuff like that.
Yes.
But I felt it was like really important to tell his story. And since I knew him so well and I was in his band and I know this whole scene, I just decided that it was my job to try and do it.
For sure. And, I think I've known about the name, Dean Johnson, just because I'm also in queer spaces here in Toronto, Canada, but also there's something about his story that can be translated to a lot of other queer folks. It's very personal. I also wanted to highlight how you included a lot of great details, not just friends of Dean who are speaking about their experience being in his life, but also archival footage and animation. And, how was that how did that come about in terms of, because he's so bigger than life that it complemented his story so well?
Well, all of it was like a little bit of a long process. Like documentary filmmaking is so different than narrative. Narrative, you tell the footage what to do, and in documentaries, the footage tells you what to do. And you're kind of at the mercy of it. When I first started the film, I thought I was gonna like solve his murder. Like if it was murder, if it was an OD, I was gonna
Mm,
figure it all out and be queen of the neighborhood and all that. And it really
yes.
didn't end up being that at all. And somewhere in the making of the film, I realized that like his death is a really weird thing. He died in a really weird way. The other
Mhm.
gentleman died in the same apartment, died in the same very weird way. But I
Yes.
really wanted the film to be more about his life than his death.
Mhm.
Because in his life, he did so much. And he was such a dramatic and hilarious character that if he had to choose his own death, this would be the death he would choose. Because it's so dramatic. Like, he ended up in page 6 of the Post for his death, as opposed to dying in a hospital of AIDS or any. But he's been HIV plus since 87, and there wasn't even a cocktail then. There was no meds. Nobody cared. People were dying all over the place, and it was just nobody cared about it. It was a full-on plague. And so for him, I think he lived his life like this might be his last day on earth. But he lived his whole life like that. And I
Yes.
found that in itself very inspiring, just as a human,
Mm.
knowing him. So after he died in a very strange way, I told myself I was going to make this documentary, and then I think I was doing my play at the time. So, I just had to wait for things to shake out and then have a kind of enough money to start. And then once I started reaching out to the community, and, we have like 100 hours of footage. Like I could seriously make this a mini series or something,
For real.
because like he knew everyone on the planet. Like, I'd interview one person like, oh, you should really talk to so and so, but they live in LA now. Oh, you should really talk to so and so. And so I was flying all around and talking to everybody who knew him. And, it was really lovely because everyone loved him, even if they had a complicated relationship with him. His sister, he helped her discover heroin, in their 20s, which is not great, and she
Mhm.
she just like she just loved him more than anybody. Like he just
Yes.
elicited that love no matter what you were going through. Like one of his bandmates was like, even if you were pissed at him, you still just couldn't help but love him.
Yes.
If you were pissed at him for like good reason, like you sold your drum set for drugs or whatever, whatever it was, he just was so charming. And for me, he could just talk me into anything, before gigs, shaving his back in the men's rooms, and everybody would just be horrified. We just didn't care. We just thought it was the funniest
Mhm.
thing. And the animation, that was a decision because there's so much sex in it. I didn't want it just to be for like gay men wanting to watch sex or people that
Sure.
like gay sex, which are plenty of people besides gay men, obviously. But I wanted it to sort of be accessible to everybody. And Dean really thought of sex as a hilarious thing. Like,
Right.
it was his living, and even more than his living, he would have sex with multiple people in a day. Like, sex was very important to him,
Right. Right.
especially when people were telling him he couldn't have it. Then he was like
Exactly.
basically like, fuck you, I'm going to have so much sex, you're not even going to believe it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so sex was really important to him. And so sex needed to be a big part of the film because it's about him, but I didn't want the sex to be so graphic that people would be like, almost turned off by it, and they wouldn't be able to like really like sink into the story. And
Right.
so I really wanted it to be not only animation, but kind of 2D animation.
Mm.
And so I found Lance Tooks and Rob Yolfo, the animators. They did a really great job, and they're so fun. And those guys are both, not that it matters, but they both have wives, and they're like great guys. And but they like, how all guys like to just draw penises. They had a blast.
No
They would
problem.
tell me, I would like write out the animation for them, and they're like, "Oh my God, I love this. What if we do this? What if we do that? What if there's like a line of dicks around him?" They were just totally all in. And it was just like a beautiful thing to work with those guys. It was like really fun and magical. So
The reason I also like the format is because it allows us to maybe have a sense of humor that maybe Dean would also have. I feel like it translated really well with everything that you tell us, in other form, like in interviews and all of that. It was a good compliment.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, yeah, he really thought sex was funny. I mean, when he did like spoken word at towards the end of his life,
Yes.
everything was hilarious. And for me, the one of the first stories that I remember hearing was the rooftop story where he's like, "We fucked in the sun and the Circle Line tooted its horn at us as they passed by on the Hudson. The
Yes.
tourists looked happy." I mean, that's so his sense of humor.
Hmm.
And his diaries are just like scandalous and they're just hilarious. Like he just thought the whole thing was hysterical.
Hmm.
He didn't take himself too seriously, and he brought this like sexual joy to spaces that a lot of times before Dean were like very serious. Even like something like S&M or something. He just thought that stuff was hilarious. And it was just part of his joy bringing. He didn't take himself or anything else too seriously except for gay rights. That was the
Right.
thing, but everything he had into all of the seriousness in him was to try and further rights for queer people. And I think that that's really the way to do it. In these times that we're living in right now, we can't let despair just take us. We have to keep our joy and we also have to fight back, you
I
know.
think so. And I think, his story, I'm sure there are other queer artists whose stories should be told as well from that era, but,
Oh,
all different
absolutely. Yeah.
times. And I think it does give us that historical context of what was going on in the time. I know you said you came in the 90s, but there's something in the film around queer rock, and there's a scene there, or a clip where I think Dean is the one talking about this is about being activists, and it's a
Yeah,
movement. And I'm
absolutely.
curious about, were you kind of with them at the time this was happening?
Oh
Um,
yeah, 100%. I played in the band for, God, I don't know, a decade or 8 years or something. But it was all activism to him. Even his sex parties were activism. His sex parties were like, it's the 80s, it's Reagan, it's all these like Christian fundamentalists telling us that, oh, if you don't want to get AIDS, you have to be abstinent. And it's like we're not going to not be who we are. We're going to figure out a way out of this crisis because obviously you're not going to help us find a way out of this crisis. And so he did everything just really out loud, no matter
right.
what it cost him. I mean, he lost a major record deal because he wouldn't shut up about being gay in the 80s. This is when Boy George was like just quirky. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes,
everybody was
yes.
in the closet. And Dean not only refused to be in the closet, but he was like, I'm going to be the outest gay man you've ever seen. The more you tell me to be in the closet, the more I'm going to out you also. He just really was an activist in everything that he did. In the queer rock scene at CBGB's, he was the only person to ever throw a gay party at CBGB's. It
Mhm.
used to be like specifically a punk rock place, and you'd walk
Yeah,
by and they'd be like faggot. It was like a lot of abuse and stuff coming out of
sure.
rock and roll space. And also women weren't invited at all. And trans women,
Much
forget it.
less. Hmm.
Yeah, and Dean made sure that not only were we all included, we took over the club. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like, and so his activism was really, really huge in everything that he did.
Yeah,
You
and I
know?
think it kind of highlights the idea of taking up space too, and plus, kind of, I guess, the whole sex positive movement as well, that
Yeah.
has now become a bigger thing, and hopefully, it continues to move forward, but we're in precarious times. So I
Yes.
think it's kind of really timely. I mean, I don't think you could have foreseen the
Right.
release of this film with at Slamdance, and sort of the discussions in my engender, but no pun intended. So, what have been the discussions maybe with you and people who were part of the film? Anything that sort of has been a highlight or sort of like a gem has stayed with you during the making of this?
Well, Dean was a big influence on me just in being radically yourself, whatever that is. I'm an old school East Village dyke, but I'm also non-binary. I actually don't even believe in gender. I think that
Mhm.
gender and race were created just to try and hurt people, try and put one person above another person. I'm also an Arab Jew, like I'm a Palestinian Jew. And so the oppressor and the oppressed.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And so I think that just as humans, we're all the same. Like Native American cultures think that there are like five genders, and I'm probably number like three or four, and Dean was one through five. But
Mhm.
Dean was very, although I don't know if he would consider himself necessarily transgender, he was in between genders. Like he was this
Right.
giant man physically, but he was kind of like a sweetheart girl inside, like he was very feminine, and so that was part of the decision to have a female voice, was that I wanted the film to be transgender, like Dean is transgender. And
Right.
so for the film festival, for me, the best stuff is just being able to be like, super gay and out about gender, because they're literally trying to erase trans people. Like they erased the T out of Stonewall. Like I'm like,
Yes.
what are
Yes.
you
Yes.
talking about? Like
Mhm.
we're in a space right now where we have to out loud and as loud as we possibly can in your face fight for our rights again. And as depressing as it may seem, we lived through the AIDS crisis. We're going to live through this too, and we're going to be bigger and better and stronger. But the only way to do that is to be all together.
Right.
The only way we defeat this, the fascist, homophobic, racist, Nazi shit that we're in right now, the way that we defeat it is all together, in mass, loud, pushing back.
Right. And I think it's that community and bridging of all groups too. I mean, also in age, when it comes to age, right?
Oh, yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
making sure
The
that the
gay
younger
community
ones.
the gay male community in particular is very ageist. You know,
Mm,
Dean, he died at 46, but we were friends for, I don't know, the last 10 years of his life or something. And he was really worried, especially as a sex worker, about if he was going to starve to death,
yeah.
growing older as an older guy. That stuff was really real. And he said most of his clients were like 20 somethings, you
Right.
know. And
Yeah.
so, that's why he was constantly in the gym, that and sex, but
Yes, definitely goes together.
that and the open sex that happens in the gyms in New York City. But he was constantly working on his body and stuff because he was just really worried. His body was his living, and he was worried he couldn't make a living.
Yeah.
And I think he sort of had given up faith at record labels at that point. Because the Velvet Mafia were signed, and then they didn't do anything for us,
I
and then they
know.
dumped us, and we released our own album, and it was really the music kept getting better and better and better.
Mhm.
Dean's a hit maker, he has that low monotone, voice, but Lou Reed did it, I mean, he's a hit maker. He wrote hit songs.
Mhm. And also very
Hey.
timely lyrics.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Pardon me while I go stepping out to Fire Island with David Geffen. I mean, come on, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he really, he was one of the funniest people I've ever known. And he was also one of the smartest people I'd ever known. And you go to band practice with Dean and you would know what was going on CNN or all across the world in the news that day, but he would also tell you like, just gossip that happened on the Oprah Winfrey show or whatever it was.
Sure.
But he consumed news and was constantly trying to like take that space of, this is us, how can I forward our community in the most positive way?
Mhm.
So, and also everything always had a sense of humor. Like even those sex parties, they were hilarious. They were hilarious. Like they would have like crazy sex acts, that would be like a Seinfeld sex act, or like, somebody dressed up like Jesus or whatever. Like, they everything was done tongue in cheek.
Right.
Um, and nothing was like, he really, if you were uptight in any way, he would push up against whatever that
Mhm.
was.
So I'm thinking that it's also, the film sort of gives us a very intimate look at Dean, the person, but it also kind of reinforces the idea of community, and
Yeah.
sometimes you stay underground even though you're trying to be breaking into the mainstream, or in quotes mainstream. Does
Yeah,
that
well,
kind of make sense
I
a
think
bit?
that, I really think that if Dean lived in a different time, like he was very important to the time that he lived in.
Hmm.
Nobody was doing what he like, even somebody like Joey Arias who had a record deal and, was like kind of charting here and there, was still sort of not all the way out loud because his record label was like, just say you're quirky like David Bowie, don't say
Hmm.
you're gay. Because
Right.
people were so scared of gay people during the AIDS crisis. They were so not just shaming, but we were lepers, like,
For
oh,
sure.
there's footage in the film that the footage itself, if people don't know, at the end, we're talking about how the DC cops are not great with queer people. And I
Right.
specifically chose
Mhm.
this clip of someone getting arrested with the cops wearing kitchen gloves because
Yes.
people don't remember that.
Hmm.
Police thought that if you touch someone with HIV or any random gay person that even didn't
It could
have
be
HIV,
contagious.
could get AIDS, you would get a full-blown AIDS. And so they were all wearing kitchen gloves to try and protect
Right.
themselves from AIDS when they had to arrest gay people. And, the disconnect was it was just crazy back then. And Fauci was actually a leader in getting people to understand, how AIDS actually got transmitted, and
Hmm.
ACT UP. If it wasn't for ACT UP, we still wouldn't have, HIV suppressants and stuff.
Right.
They
Hmm.
literally had die-ins on the streets to try and make people care, you know?
Yes,
So,
absolutely. I mean, I grew up in the 90s and I knew a little bit of it, but even again, it was through learning from elders and,
yes,
you need to
yes.
have safe people that you can kind of talk to about this stuff. So I know that that history, like that historical part of his life is very important. And I do appreciate the archival footage you included as well of, some of the protests and
Yeah.
some of the actions that took place, I think by the White House. I think that was so
Oh
important.
yeah, I actually I remember ACT UP doing a ton of protests, but I didn't know until I interviewed Joan Jett Black, who lives in San Francisco. And I don't know if you know Joan Jett Black, but look him up because he was the only drag queen to ever run for president.
Right.
And it's a pretty incredible story. He's a really amazing person. But he was the one who told me about them throwing the ashes on the lawn of the White House. And so I found the footage and was just like, oh my God, I mean, think about the courage that took,
Yes.
you know, just to take someone that you loved all the way to DC and throw the ashes on the White House lawn so they would pay a little attention to the full-on plague that everybody was in.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to get their attention.
Yes. And and it's now I'm thinking of, you had mentioned that you have hundreds of hours. So, so let's go into that process of, we now need to bring it into a narrative that is, I guess, more film format.
Right. Yeah.
Are we
For
going to
me,
get to see, sorry, go ahead. You start.
oh, I'm sorry. What was your question? I cut
No,
you
I was
off.
going to say we can talk about that first, but also I want to hear if maybe there will be an opportunity to watch some extras.
Well, I certainly hope so. My hope is that someone picks it up and they care enough about the story that I can make, kind of a docu-series about it because we certainly have enough footage of this
Right.
time. For me, I always just came back to does it have to do with Dean? Because I have incredible interviews like from
Yes.
incredible people, but I had to just keep coming back to does it have to do with Dean and his particular story at this time, and how does it have to do with Dean? And I would just talk to the sky all the time. I got the title for the film. I like was asleep, and then I woke up in the middle of the night, and I heard his voice in my head going, "Lola, name it after my dick," and I was like, "Okay, the name of the film is the Big Johnson." Like I really tried to connect with him. And before I even started the process of the film, I called Beth, his sister, and I was like, is it okay if I do this? And can you be a consultant on the film? Because she's known him since birth and she
Of course.
knows, I know everyone in the community, but she'll be able to tell me, oh, that was actually somebody that Dean knew a lot, or that was someone that Dean slept with once and they just are in love with him, or whatever it is. She had the inside scoop, and it was really lovely working with her too. So.
That makes sense. What has been some of the feedback you've received from the film and
So far it's really been amazing. I feel like I've been sort of living in a basement, like working, toiling for such
for
a long time.
sure.
You never know how people are going to like the film. But Slamdance has been really, really great to us. We've gotten a lot of really good press so far. And we had a screening last night where a woman that I didn't know, that didn't know Dean, was in tears. And she was just like, I just felt like I knew him. And by the end, it was a big loss for me too. And that, like, put me in tears because
Sure.
my biggest hope for the film is just that people will know and appreciate this bright and shining light that was this friend of ours that we lost too soon.
Hmm.
It was a real devastating event for the community. And also losing someone like that where you don't know the answer of how they died
Exactly.
just makes the grief that much bigger because you can't like, put a neat little bow on it and be like, And I don't know if we'll ever know. I got only one person from law enforcement to talk to me, and it was
Wow.
this DC police liaison that was on the case, and he was later convicted of sex with a minor.
Oh, yes. Wow.
So, yeah, and so, I hear the lawyer in my head going, "Don't say his name, but you can look it up."
Yeah.
Anyway, but I couldn't use his testimony because obviously this is not a trustworthy source, and no one
Complicated.
would talk to us. It was just like no comment, no comment, no comment. We tried for years to get anybody, like a DA or any police officer, to talk to us, and no one would talk to us, and that was a really disappointing thing. I didn't realize how closed off that experience was going to be.
For sure. You did mention his sister, and thank you for reminding me of her. What was her reaction to the film?
Well, her opinion was the one I was most nervous about, her and the band,
Hmm.
because
Yes,
the
yes.
band is going to be like, that was a weenie song and it's supposed to, whatever. You put this verse in it, but not this chorus, whatever. But everybody's just really liked the film a lot. They can see the love that I had for Dean, which is the love that they share as well, and Beth has just been, thank God she really, really loved the movie, and she said something just recently, which was like, you may not have solved it, but you were the one that really tried. And
Mm,
that really meant a lot to me, because he was just a very important person in my life, and I just want to do service to him and also to the world by letting people know who he was. My hope is that some young trans kid, in the middle of Oklahoma or something, or some young queer kid that's like questioning themselves, that might have homophobic parents. I had homophobic parents. I lived in
sure.
homophobic places, been gay bashed multiple times. It took me a long time to come out because of gay shame and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
I just hope that this can accelerate somebody with their own acceptance of themselves.
Exactly. And I will say that I will say that on a personal note, it did affect me because I did lose a family member, not in the same way, but it was an elder queer family member. And I think we can all bring this back to somebody in our lives that has made such an impact,
Yeah.
that kind of allowed us to have certain freedoms too. And I think it's so relatable in so many ways.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, he really was something. Like everything he did was for us and for future generations to be able to
Hmm.
be free. Freedom was very important to him. Like I always say, the theme of the film is freedom versus consequence. You know,
Yes. Hmm.
because it was very important to him to be free.
Right.
And even getting HIV and all of that stuff, he would openly talk about being HIV and openly talk about safe sex and why you should have safe sex. And so even something that his freedom led to that consequence, he brought it back to freedom. Okay, now I'm HIV. This is how I'm going to be a responsible person with HIV. We're still going to have sex parties, but we're going to do it in this responsible way.
Right.
And you cannot take away my gay freedom for anything. And
Mm.
he lived every day of his life like that. He really did.
For
So.
sure. So what are the opportunities? I mean, Slamdance is such a great outlet for this film or for a premiere for this film. What is the hope next? Is it more festival journeys before it gets to
Yeah,
kind of like
it's really funny. I was talking with my wife and I was like, I'm gonna strategize about the film festival circuit and stuff. And she's like, be like Dean and fuck everybody. So we literally
I love
are
it.
fucking everybody. I've applied to 50 different film festivals. The New York screening will be really off the chain. I'm not sure if it's gonna be either Tribeca or a New Fest or it just depends. Nothing's come back to us yet. It's just
Sure.
not,
Hmm.
but we're just applying to everything. I would just love to do a bunch of European film festivals as well. I would love to do film festivals, in places where where gay people can't be out. Like I would really love for everybody to be able to see this film. And
Hmm.
then of course, like we would love for it to land like at an HBO or a Hulu or something like that after that. But I just want to do the festival circuit first and see it in a crowd of people and
Yes.
see how he affects a crowd of people. Yeah, it was so cool that a woman that we don't know that wasn't in the scene, the film still made her cry, and laugh also, because that was being friends with Dean Johnson. He'll make you laugh and make you
Absolutely.
cry. He'll rip your heart out and then give it back to you. So yeah, yeah, I just want everyone to know him, and so I'm gonna do I'm going to do my best to make sure that everyone gets to see the film, not even necessarily for me as a director, but just for Dean as a human. I just want everyone to know him like I knew him because
Yeah,
it was amazing to be friends with him. It really was. It
for
changed my life.
sure. Thank you for sharing him with us. Is there a way that we can keep track of the film or for
Yeah,
news or what's the best way?
yeah, we you can just look up Lola Rocknrolla or the Big Johnson and there'll be alerts for what's going to happen next
Mhm.
with the film. Yeah, we're constantly, IMDb also too and
Yes. Mhm.
yeah, there you all you have to do is like Google us and you'll see what's happening with the film. Yeah.
Yes. I was
And the
gonna
New York
say I
State
just did, so if I can find it, anybody
yeah,
can find
yeah.
it.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of really great reviews. Like Film Threat gave us a wonderful review, and we're on Rotten Tomatoes and all that stuff too. And I'm really grateful that people are responding to the film well. Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. Lola,
yeah.
it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. And again, congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for having us. We really appreciate it. Yeah,
It's my
thank you.
pleasure.
All right,
Thanks.
nice to meet you. Okay,
Likewise.
yeah.
Thanks, Heidi.